At 6:17 in the morning, a Russian supply convoy nearly 2 kilometers long was only minutes away from reaching safer ground near Crimea. For hours before that, Ukrainian reconnaissance drones had been quietly tracking the convoy from above, as trucks, fuel tankers, ammunition carriers, armored escorts, and engineering vehicles moved south along the M14 highway. Ukraine could have launched the attack much earlier. But if the drones had struck too soon, the Russian convoy would still have had enough space to scatter and avoid becoming trapped. Ahead, the M14 narrowed between open fields and thin tree lines. The distance between vehicles grew shorter with every kilometer. The convoy kept moving, but the space available to maneuver was steadily disappearing. That was the moment Ukraine had been waiting for. The convoy was no longer just a line of vehicles heading toward Crimea. It had become a moving logistics system entering a place where speed, spacing, and timing could all turn against it. So why did Ukraine wait until the convoy reached that narrow stretch of road before launching the attack? And how could only a small number of FPV drones threaten an entire Russian supply mission before it reached Crimea? At 6:17 in the morning, the convoy was still moving. Nearly 2 kilometers of Russian vehicles rolled south along the M14 highway toward Crimea. Trucks carried supplies, fuel tankers transported diesel, ammunition carriers moved with armored escorts, and recovery and engineering vehicles followed behind. From the ground, it looked like another routine logistics movement behind the front line. Yet far above the road, Ukrainian reconnaissance drones were watching. The operation began with patience, not firepower. Ukrainian crews were not chasing one valuable truck. They were studying the full formation. Every change in speed, every shift in spacing, and every movement by the escorts gave them a clearer picture. Damaging one vehicle would not necessarily stop the mission. A long convoy can absorb scattered losses if the rest keeps moving. One disabled truck can be bypassed. One damaged tanker can be left behind. As long as the road stays open, fuel and ammunition may still reach their destination. So Ukraine waited. The convoy still had too much room. Large gaps between vehicles gave Russian drivers time to react if the attack came early. Armored escorts could reposition, trucks could brake, and some vehicles might leave the road before the formation became trapped. The chosen section of the M14 offered a better chance. South of the Melitopol area, the road narrowed between open fields and thin tree lines. Escape routes became limited, cover was poor, and heavy vehicles had less room to maneuver. The deeper the convoy moved into this area, the more its own size became a liability. A convoy nearly 2 kilometers long cannot react like a small patrol. Fuel tankers, ammunition carriers, engineering vehicles, and recovery trucks all move differently. Once space begins to shrink, every vehicle depends more on the one ahead. A delay near the front can spread backward through the whole column. Ukrainian drone teams watched for that compression. They allowed the terrain to shape the battlefield before launching a strike. As gaps began to close, the convoy became denser, and its options became fewer. Each meter forward made the road more useful to Ukraine. Russian forces were not unprotected. Armored escorts traveled with the column, engineering vehicles were present, and reconnaissance together with electronic warfare assets helped secure the route. Still, those measures could not change the geography of the highway. By this stage, Ukraine had nearly what it needed. Hours of surveillance had revealed the route, measured the movement, and identified the point where mobility would be weakest. The question was whether Ukraine could wait until the road made the convoy vulnerable. That moment arrived as the Russian vehicles committed themselves to the narrow stretch of the M14, with little room left to recover. Around 6:31 in the morning, the waiting ended. The Russian convoy had reached the section of the M14 that Ukrainian drone teams had watched for hours. The vehicles were still moving, but the road now offered little room for error. At that moment, several Ukrainian FPV drones lifted off almost at the same time. There was no opening artillery barrage and no large missile strike. The first move was smaller, faster, and more precise, built for timing rather than spectacle. The first drone went toward the front of the column. Its purpose was not to create the largest explosion. It was to stop the lead vehicles and break the forward motion of the convoy. Seconds later, another FPV moved toward the rear area of the long formation, where the last vehicles still held the route behind them. Once the front and rear were hit, the convoy lost its shape. Drivers near the middle had no clear choice. Moving forward became dangerous because the lead vehicles were blocked. Reversing became almost impossible because the rear was also under attack. The whole formation began to compress inside the narrow corridor of the M14. What had been a moving supply line now became a trapped line of heavy vehicles, each one depending on the next. This was the real effect of the opening strike. Ukraine was not trying to destroy every vehicle in the first wave. It was attacking movement itself at the most fragile moment. A convoy survives by flow. It needs space between vehicles, clear orders, and a road that remains open. When those three conditions disappeared, the size of the convoy stopped being an advantage. It became weight, length, and pressure inside one road. The most dangerous cargo was now stuck in the same place. Fuel tankers, ammunition carriers, recovery vehicles, armored escorts, and supply trucks were pushed into one narrow highway space. Each vehicle had a different role, but in that moment, they all shared the same weakness. They could not freely move. A tanker could not simply leave the road. An ammunition truck could not turn around through traffic. A recovery vehicle could not reach the front if the vehicles ahead were frozen. Inside the Russian column, confusion grew quickly. Crews could see smoke, stopped vehicles, and movement in different directions, but each crew only understood a small part of the battlefield. Some needed to know whether the front was open. Others needed to know whether the rear was still clear. Radio traffic became crowded because every crew was asking for direction at the same time. In a long convoy, unclear orders can travel slower than panic. This is where a logistics convoy becomes harder to control than a combat unit. A tank platoon can spread, fire, and maneuver with fewer vehicles. A supply convoy carries the material of war, but it is less flexible once it is forced to stop. Drivers need instructions. Escort crews need targets. Recovery teams need access. Commanders need a clear picture. On the M14, all of those needs appeared at once. Ukraine had achieved the first goal of the ambush. The convoy was not destroyed, but it was no longer moving as a mission. Its front was blocked, its rear was threatened, and its center was filled with vehicles that could become dangerous if the situation worsened. The road had turned from a route toward Crimea into a holding area under drone pressure. At this stage, control mattered more than damage. But a trapped convoy is not the same as a defeated convoy. Russian forces still had armored escorts ready, engineering support, and the ability to respond. If they could open another route away from the highway, part of the formation might still escape. That meant Ukraine had closed the trap, but the next phase would decide whether it could keep it closed. The convoy was trapped on the M14, but it was not helpless. Once the front and rear of the column were blocked, Russian crews began looking for a way off the highway. The road had become too dangerous, so the answer had to come from the fields beside it. An IMR-2 engineering vehicle moved out of the formation and started pushing toward the western side of the M14. This vehicle mattered because it was built for moments when movement has been lost. It could clear obstacles, shape a rough path, and help other vehicles escape a blocked route. In this battle, the IMR-2 became the key to whether the convoy could regain motion. If it succeeded, a small opening could allow the vehicles to leave the pavement, and once one vehicle escaped, others might follow. The engineering vehicle did not move alone. BTR-82A armored personnel carriers spread out to protect the escape effort. Their task was urgent. They had to keep Ukrainian FPV drones away from the IMR-2 long enough for the engineers to work. The BTR-82A carries a 30mm cannon, and that weapon became part of the convoy's close defense. The firing began quickly. Bursts from the 30mm guns swept across the fields and into the airspace where FPV drones were approaching. Tracer rounds cut through the area around the escape route. Some Ukrainian drones did not reach their targets. One was destroyed before impact. Another lost its video feed. Others fell short as Russian fire filled the space around the engineers. The ambush was no longer only about drones descending on trapped vehicles. It had become a fight over access to one escape lane. This was the first major sign that the ambush had become contested. Ukraine had gained surprise and observation, but Russia still had weapons, crews, and procedures meant to restore control. The convoy had been stopped, yet the protective elements were still functioning. Armored escorts were buying time for the IMR-2, and that time began to matter with every meter. The engineering vehicle pushed forward through the field. 40 meters became 50. 50 became more. The path was still rough and narrow, but it gave Russian crews a possible way out. Engines inside the convoy began to come back to life. Some drivers saw movement ahead and believed the situation might still be recoverable. For a convoy under pressure, that belief can change behavior. Crews who think an exit exists may keep trying to move instead of abandoning vehicles or waiting for orders. Then, artillery entered the fight. Russian batteries began responding toward the Ukrainian drone control area. At first, the rounds landed far enough away to be a warning rather than a direct hit. But the pattern changed as the battle continued. The impacts moved closer, and pressure on the Ukrainian operators increased. They were no longer watching a frozen column. The battlefield was pushing back. The longer the IMR-2 kept moving, the more fragile Ukraine's trap became. The more BTR crews fired, the harder it was for FPV drones to reach the engineering vehicle. The closer Russian artillery landed, the less time Ukraine had to decide what came next. A stopped convoy was beginning to show signs of movement again. If the IMR-2 opened the route, the ambush could turn from a decisive strike into a delay. That forced Ukraine toward a new phase. The target was no longer only the convoy on the M14. It was the force trying to reopen the convoy's future. Ukraine faced a different problem. The convoy had been stopped on the M14, but the escape effort in the fields was still alive. The IMR-2 continued trying to open a path, while BTR-82A escorts protected it from Ukrainian FPV drones. If that screen held long enough, the rough track beside the highway could become an exit. Once one vehicle left the road, others could try to follow. So Ukraine shifted its focus. The next drones were not sent mainly toward the trucks trapped on the highway. They were directed toward the armored cover around the engineering vehicle. This was a decision about tempo. The BTRs were helping the IMR-2 buy time, and time was the one thing Ukraine could not allow Russia to regain. At that point, the most urgent target was not cargo. It was the shield around the escape route. The BTRs mattered because they gave the engineers room to work. Their 30mm cannons forced Ukrainian drones to approach through direct fire. Their movement across the field created a shield around the IMR-2, and their presence gave Russian drivers a reason to believe that an exit might still open. The convoy was trapped, but it was not yet sealed. Ukraine needed to slow this protection layer before it could stop the escape. Each FPV attack toward the escorts had a wider purpose. A hit could damage a BTR, but even a near miss could force the crew to maneuver or reduce fire. Every pause around the armored screen gave the IMR-2 less freedom to push forward. Every second lost in the field kept the supply vehicles on the M14 inside danger. Behind that fight, the main body of the convoy remained locked in place. Fuel tankers were mixed with ammunition carriers and recovery vehicles. Supply trucks were stuck between blocked movement ahead and uncertainty behind. The longer this continued, the more dangerous the road became for Russian crews. They needed motion, but motion depended on the same escorts Ukraine was now trying to suppress. The pressure on Ukrainian operators was also growing. Russian artillery was landing closer to the drone control area. Drone batteries were running down. Signal quality could change at any moment. Some FPV drones had already failed to reach their targets, and every failed attack reduced the options left. The battle was becoming tighter, not only on the road, but also inside the decision cycle of the Ukrainian teams. At this stage, Ukraine could not waste drones on symbolic targets. The goal was not to count armored vehicles destroyed. The goal was to keep the convoy from recovering movement. That meant striking the forces trying to restore order, even while more explosive cargo remained trapped in the column. Small delays could now decide the outcome. If the BTRs kept the sky clear and the IMR-2 widened the path, the convoy might escape with losses. If Ukraine held the escorts down, the road would remain blocked and the trapped cargo would stay inside the danger zone. But slowing the escape was no longer enough. Ukraine needed a strike that could break the rescue effort and push the convoy deeper into confusion from the inside fast. The next target would be a fuel tanker. At 6:38 in the morning, Ukraine chose a target that could change the shape of the battle in a matter of seconds. A Ukrainian FPV drone struck a Russian fuel tanker inside the blocked convoy. At first, it looked like one more hit on one more vehicle. The tanker stopped. Flames appeared near the side of the road, and nearby crews reacted to the sudden fire. Then the effect grew larger. Thick black smoke began rising over the M14, spreading across the narrow highway and covering part of the convoy from front to center. For many Russian drivers, the smoke created immediate confusion. Many crews could no longer see what was happening ahead. Vehicles near the possible exit slowed or stopped. Some drivers tried to reverse, but the rear of the formation remained blocked. Others waited for instructions that could not arrive fast enough. In a long convoy, visibility is part of control. When drivers cannot see the road, the vehicle ahead, or the route out, every movement becomes dangerous. The fuel fire also slowed the Russian engineering effort. The IMR-2 had been trying to keep the escape path alive, but smoke and disorder changed the rhythm around it. The vehicle could still move, and the escort still had weapons, yet the rescue effort now had to operate through heat, poor visibility, and growing confusion. The road was no longer blocked only by damaged vehicles. It was being covered by the consequences of the convoy's own cargo. But the smoke did not help Ukraine completely. It also blinded the drones. Some FPV feeds showed only black clouds. Others caught brief movement, then lost it again. A vehicle appeared for a second, then vanished behind the smoke. Another seemed to move, but its direction was unclear. The same fire that slowed Russian drivers also reduced the certainty of Ukrainian operators. This created a dangerous moment in the ambush. Ukraine had disrupted the convoy, but its view of the battlefield was breaking apart. The drone teams could see movement, not a full picture. Some Russian vehicles may have been trying to slip through the confusion. Others may have been trapped but hidden from view. The difference mattered because Ukraine did not have unlimited drones, battery life, or time. The battle now became a contest inside a cloud of smoke. Russia needed to find a way out before the road closed again. Ukraine needed to decide which movement mattered and which target would shape the next stage. Chasing every vehicle that appeared through the smoke was impossible. Waiting for a perfect picture was also impossible. The battlefield was changing too quickly. The fuel tanker strike had achieved more than a fire. It had broken the rescue rhythm, blocked visibility, and forced both sides into uncertainty. But uncertainty created the hardest choice of the operation. Ukraine could chase the vehicles still visible through the smoke, or search for the ammunition carriers hidden deeper inside the convoy. Ukraine now faced the hardest choice of the ambush. Inside the smoke, some Russian vehicles were still moving. They appeared for moments, then vanished behind black clouds. Chasing them would have been the safer choice because the drone teams could see those targets. But Ukraine chose to strike deeper into the convoy, where the ammunition carriers were hidden. That decision carried risk. The target was not fully clear. Smoke made identification difficult, and the drones had little time left. Yet the logic was direct. Destroying one escaping vehicle might remove one truck from the column. Hitting ammunition could break the whole formation from inside. Ukraine was no longer trying to win a chase. It was trying to make the road unusable. The first explosion did not settle the battle. It was smaller than expected, and for a moment the result looked uncertain. Russian recovery vehicles were still present. Armored escorts still had weapons. The rough escape route near the field still existed. Then the deeper explosions began. A larger blast erupted inside the convoy, followed by more detonations as ammunition caught fire. Fragments cut across the M14. Burning debris scattered toward the roadside. Vehicles that might have moved minutes earlier were now blocked by fire, wreckage, and fresh explosions. The convoy was no longer only under drone attack. Its own cargo had become part of the destruction. The rescue effort also began to collapse. Recovery vehicles could not move freely through the wreckage. Some became trapped behind burning trucks. Others had no route forward. Soldiers abandoned vehicles that still had engines running, while others moved toward ditches and the roadside to escape the blasts. Control inside the convoy was breaking into survival decisions, and the original supply mission was disappearing in real time. Still, one final problem remained. The IMR-2 was trying to keep the last escape path alive. If it opened enough space, a few vehicles might still leave the highway. Ukraine had one final FPV available, with limited battery and unstable signal. The choice came down to the engineering vehicle, because the convoy could still recover some movement if that path stayed open. The drone struck the IMR-2 and stopped it. After that hit, the road remained on the map, but the mission was gone. The convoy did not need to be erased to be defeated. It only needed to fail before reaching Crimea. The ambush on the M14 shows that a convoy does not have to be destroyed to be defeated. What mattered was whether fuel, ammunition, recovery vehicles, and engineering support could reach Crimea in time. Once that mission failed, the convoy lost its value as a supply force, even if some vehicles survived. For Ukraine, the lesson is clear. Small drones can create large battlefield effects when they are guided by surveillance, terrain, timing, and careful target selection. The power came not from one strike alone, but from the way each decision reduced Russian movement. For Russia, the cost is wider than one convoy. Future supply runs toward Crimea may need more electronic warfare, more armor, more engineers, and more artillery cover. That means slower movement, heavier protection, and greater pressure on the logistics system. In a long war, delays can become damage, and damage to logistics can shape the front. If you found this report helpful, please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Military Force for more in-depth analysis of today's military and geopolitical events. Every battle teaches lessons about strategy, technology, and decision-making, but it also reminds us that war always carries a human cost that reaches far beyond the battlefield. By understanding how conflicts unfold, we can better appreciate the value of peace and the importance of preventing future wars.